There is this idea that you're making a kind of documentary cinema, but at the same time there is a performance going on because you're framing it in a particular way, or reconstructing it, reenacting it, or creating these discrepancies between the voice and the event.
Yeah, I think, you know, when I was very young, a film that I watched that I think had a profound effect on me, and I'm sure a profound effect on anybody who sees it, was Rashomon. And I think that idea that the truth is very unstable has been a strong influence, I suppose. And I suppose in terms of documentary, there's an expectation that somehow it's going to tell the truth or deliver the truth. And clearly that's problematic. And I suppose in a way that's what I was investigating by using verbatim sound and constructed images and putting those things together to I suppose draw attention to the fact that's unstable, and we shouldn't assume that it's accurate or it's the truth, and yet we keep searching for it.
And one of the changes in this work is that you, in random acts, you're filming people, but you're also gathering in a lot of sampled images, and it seems to come out of that tradition, or look back to that British tradition of scratch video. And you stopped doing that. Why was that something you wanted to do at that point, and why did you move on to something else?
That was really specific to that piece of work in a way, because I suppose it's partly, you know, people told me these stories about these one-night stands. So, you know, it was sex with strangers in public places. That was specifically what the kind of the stories that I was looking for. And in a way, I didn't want to illustrate that by doing reconstructions necessarily of what they were telling me. So I used images from pornographic films, but kind of recontextualized them and refilmed them, and that was quite a peculiar thing to do. I mean, in terms of, you know, having to search through a lot of material to find quite specific things that would work with these stories. But yeah, I mean, I guess I could go into a whole thing about female sexual pleasure and how, you know, I guess in porn films what you see is a lot of male sexual pleasure, but a lot of the stories are about female sexual pleasure. So in a way, it was kind of about taking this form, which was pornography, and recontextualizing it within these stories that, you know, the majority of the storytellers are women, so recontextualizing them in that way.
And the stuff that so much is going on, the fact that so much of this stuff is sort of going on in clubs, it does seem to come out of dance culture as well, and the idea of sort of mixing the images in this way that, you know, the edit itself becomes a very kind of, you know, pulsating. It becomes a sort of erotic pulse in the way that, you know, the dance music that would have been going on while these events are happening.
I didn't really think of it like that, but I mean, I guess there's one story that happens in a nightclub, which is the one that you know, Isla Fisher's lip syncing to, and I think there's a real ambiguity in that story about how much pleasure she took from it, and whether she was being, I don't know. There's an ambiguity in her story that I don't think is in the other stories, and in some ways, that story, which is why I chose to finish on that story, because that's partly what I was interested in exploring, I suppose.
Early on, you know, when you were working with the BFI, back then, you were known as a filmmaker, then you became to be known as more as an artist. Now people think of you as a filmmaker. There is something that happens when you make a feature film, is that you're thought to kind of cross a boundary and go into another world. And I wonder if it is in fact a two-way traffic, because a number of artists have kept a foot in both camps, and some have moved one way and not gone back the other. Do you see these as two separate worlds, or does that kind of perception of it create problems for you in terms of how you want to proceed? You know, if you wanted to do a short piece in a gallery, would it confuse people?
I don't think so, no. I think you can zigzag between the two. And I think, in a way with the Arbor, it wasn't initially devised, I suppose, or proposed as a theatrical feature film. It was actually, I mean, it was going to be a feature-length film, but I think originally it was going to be shown on TV. But it's then, you know, the Film Council got involved, and then it had a theatrical release, which I was incredibly pleased about, because I suppose it means the sound is wonderful, the image is big, and also there's this, you reach a different kind of audience, I suppose. And I guess there are advantages to that and there are disadvantages to that. And I suppose The Selfish Giant then kind of, I suppose, fairly firmly is in the, you know, it's a narrative feature film, which isn't to say that I won't ever make another experimental piece of work again, because I may well, you know, I may well do that. It so happens that at the moment I'm working on more narrative feature films.
And why did you move into, I mean, I would say straight narrative, because Selfish Giant isn't quite a straight narrative, because there is this kind of Oscar Wilde thread running through it on a very kind of subliminal level. But why did you decide to move towards, let's not say the mainstream, but you know what I mean? It wasn't a kind of conscious decision of that's what I want to do now. It was more that when I made the Arbor, I met this boy and felt very compelled to tell a version of his story, because it's not his exact story, but to tell a fictionalized version of his story and marry it together with this fairy tale, this Oscar Wilde fairy tale. So it was kind of a compulsion to do it, rather than kind of thinking, oh, now I'll make a narrative feature film. So is it a question of using the technology that works in a particular moment that's around? Because Dark Glass, you shot using, I think you couldn't remember exactly what kind of phone it was, but it was certainly before iPhones came along.
Yeah. And
is this something you look at, the possibilities of what's around at the time that are going to enable you to do particular things?
No, not really. It's probably the other way around. So with Dark Glass, it was more that it's about family photographs, and I suppose mobile phones and taking photographs on mobile phones and filming things on mobile phones that's how we make records of our lives now. And in a way that's partly what the piece was about. So it was seemed to me to be the most appropriate format to shoot on. I mean, there's something faintly ridiculous about spending an entire day shooting one very, very careful shot on a mobile phone. You know, this whole kind of, well, it's not like we had a big crew, but, you know, everybody's kind of clustered around this mobile phone that we had on a hockey stick, actually.
And presumably the whole thing, including all the camera movement, is very choreographed all the way through.
It's incredibly carefully choreographed, and actually, even though it may not look it was really difficult to get it right. And we only had one take that worked, and that was kind of, you know, at the end of the day.
Out of how many?
Oh, I can't remember. I can't remember how many takes we did, but it was the only one that worked, where everybody was in the right place at the right time. And also there was a bit of a problem because of the auto, what do you call it? The auto, it kept whiting out. And if it whited out, then it would look like there was a cut. So when the door opened, you know, we had to make sure that somehow the exposure was right. So you had to kind of work with all the automatic features on the phone so that it didn't look as though there was a cut, because it was a single screen, single shot work.
And how did it emerge? I mean, it was in that series, Single Shot, and presumably they came to you and said, or did you were approached?
Stephen sitting over there. No, it was an open call, so I put in a proposal, which was the same with the Arbor as well, actually. It was the Archangel Open, so I put in a proposal for both Dark Glass and the Arbor. Right,
so the seed of Dark Glass is one particular formal idea. So
yeah.
What happened? You went away and thought, what can I do with a single shot?
Yes, yeah, pretty much. I mean, probably I was also, the other stuff was bubbling away in terms of what, you know, putting those two things together, things that I was thinking about anyway, and putting it together with a single shot, yeah.
And can you talk about the premise? I mean, the origin of it is an actual hypnosis session which is recorded and then...
It's a hypnosis session of somebody remembering family photographs under hypnosis, and then it's revoiced by actors, and then the shot is constructed around that audio. And I think it's, you know, it's a very, I suppose in a way what I wanted to do with it, and in some ways wanted to do the same thing in some ways with The Selfish Giant, in that I wanted to make something that seemed incredibly simple, but that if you begin to dig away, it becomes more complex. And, you know, it starts and ends. It's kind of, it's a shot, reverse shot, but with no edits. So, you know, it starts with a shot from what turns out to be the mother's point of view looking at the child, and then it ends with a shot of the child looking up at the mother. And the final shot is what was described at the beginning of the film. So, if you see what I mean. So when she says, you know, she's wearing sunglasses, it's a bit of performance. That's what you actually see. That's what you see at the end.
It feels very weird, actually. It feels like a kind of Mobius strip, that it comes round, but it's sort of reversed. And it's actually very hard to figure out the space. I mean, I've watched this a number of times and tried to figure out how, well, if they go up the steps and then they look out of the window and somehow we're on ground level. So you seem to be kind of playing with this rather kind of weird geography around this house.
Well, in some ways, part of what I wanted was, even though it's shot on a mobile phone, and, you know, we're meant to use that in order to sort of make a record of our lives, that it felt like a hallucination. And I suppose the things that you might see in your mind's eye under hypnosis. And I'm quite interested in the idea that cinema is a kind of hallucination, and that it's a kind of collective hallucination, and that we're desperately trying to create some kind of accurate representation of what we see in the world around us. And I suppose what I'm partly interested in is the apparatus by which we try to do that, and how inadequate it is. And I suppose with the Arbor, that has quite a kind of serious, well, for me anyway, because in a way it's a very exposing, difficult story in terms of what happened to Andrea Dunbar and what happened to her family. And it's 30 years of one, you know, what happened to one family. And in 90 minutes, there's absolutely no way you can do a kind of truthful, accurate representation of what happened to that family. So to me, it's incredibly important that you draw the audience's attention to the fact that they're watching something that has been manipulated and constructed, so that whilst at the same time telling the story and engaging an audience, I hope, in that story, you're also aware that that's exactly what it is. It's a story, it's a retelling. And yeah, for me, that's really vital.